Welcome to ALP Corner, Family Law in the Heart of Houston.
Hello and welcome to ALP Corner, Family Law in the Heart of Houston with Allecia L. Pottinger, CEO of ALP Law Firm. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Spousal Support Unpacked, the Texas Framework Explained. Allecia, great to see you again.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we talked child support. Now we're going on to spousal support. Can you explain the general framework of spousal support in Texas, including the different types that may be awarded?
Yes, typically based on the length of the marriage and also the ability of the other spouse or the person who's receiving the spousal support, their ability to take care of themselves. So how the statute reads is that they have to be able to, or I should say, they're not entitled to spousal support unless they are not able to take care of their reasonable, necessary expenses. And that's emphasis on necessary. A lot of fights, reasonable and necessary. A lot of fights go on about what is a necessity. And people can, argue, well, it's a necessity. We know that food, clothing, and shelter are the three necessities, right?
Sure.
But then you get into situations of, how about this big house? I'm accustomed to living in this type of luxury, etc. Well, no, you don't get that after divorce. And you need to find a job to take care of it if that's what you need. So spousal support is supposed to be temporary, and it's not supposed to last that long. And it is for the purpose of letting the other spouse get on their feet while or after the divorce so that they can become self-sufficient is the purpose.
If that self-sufficiency concept, I was curious about that. How does that play into spousal support guidelines in Texas?
Okay, so the way that the courts look at that is you may have had a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad that gave up some work experiences and work, we'll say,
career growth.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured you were heading with that. Yeah.
Yes, the career and it hurts. If you stay 25 years, you're going back into the workforce at 50. It's a lot harder to find a job at 50 than it was back at 25.
Absolutely.
Giving up those particular career choices along the way. So the court are trying to give equity to that spouse in order to allow them to get back on their feet. Let me make some distinctions here, because you can have temporary spousal support, right? That's while the case is going through the divorce process. But after that, you have post-maintenance, is what we call it in Texas, maintenance, or spousal support, as most people know it. That is different and distinct. You may not have to have the reasonable and necessary expenses scenario in a temporary, because what the courts are looking for in a temporary order is to keep things just status quo. We want to make sure everything, stays the way it is until we can get the assets and the property and the kids' issues taken care of. And so post-divorce is when it really comes into play. What are those reasonable and necessary expenses? What you will find, and what people don't know, is that Texas has a statute that says if your spouse has a disability, you may be on the hook for lifetime spousal support. So in that particular scenario, it might be cheaper to keep them. So you have to watch out on what it is that you're doing. So the Texas rules will start off with about 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, and they have different levels. What the courts will do is kind of like child support. The courts will take a 20% of the net resources of the other spouse in order to pay the spouse that is needing the aid. And so that's how the courts will calculate that based on that need, after you deal with the fact that what is reasonable and necessary.
Reasonable and necessary, yeah.
Yeah.
Are there other eligibility criteria for a spouse to qualify for spousal support?
Domestic violence is another one. If there's been issues of domestic violence, we don't want to give the victimizer a way out by being victimizing the spouse. We don't want to give them a way out and not have to take care of the spouse that they beat up. And sometimes once that happens, you have a party that is just, they don't know where to go, when to go, how to go, and they really need that support at that particular time. And so it may be less than 5 years.
How do the courts determine the amount and duration of spousal support? Give me some examples, some factors that they really take into consideration. I know we've kind of talked about this in a larger sense, but can you get a little more specific?
Well, first of all, the amount is determined by statute, case law based, and statute and case law. Case law says not more than 20% of the husband or wife's net income. So whatever that net income after taxes, etc., is going to be 20%, kind of like child support. Now, if it gets to a point where the person is more than 50% of their income with child support and also spousal maintenance, based on the federal law, you can't take more than, or you can't garnish more than 50% of a person's income. So the courts have to do a balancing act. But with respect to the duration also is by statute. First of all, if you're less than 10 years that you've been married, you can only get spousal support for 5 years post-divorce. If you were married between 10 and 20 years, you can get spousal support for 7 years. And if you were married for 20 or more years, you can get spousal support for 10 years. Now, keep in mind that if your spouse at the time of the divorce is disabled, you could be on the hook for lifetime spousal support and maintenance. So in that set, it's cheaper to keep her. So what you need to look for and you need to, be very careful about is what's going on in your marriage. How is your spouse health, and are they disabled? Then you can, how long you've been married and whether they're disabled are going to be the two factors that you want to look at before you get a divorce.
What are some things that you feel people don't understand about spousal support? Maybe some myths or something that you'd love to like kind of debunk on our podcast.
That it only goes to the women.
That's actually something people still think in 2025.
Yes,
Wow.
it only, there are men that are entitled to spousal support as well.
Of course, yeah.
And also too, that what people think of is that, we're divorcing. Why do I need to take care of the other party? I'm trying to get rid of them, not have them in my life for the rest of the, duration of whatever the spousal support is. And so that is probably the biggest that I see as far as a misnomer.
So tell me when spousal support can be modified or terminated after it's been awarded.
It can be modified at any time, and it's based on the person who's paying. If there's been a substantial change in circumstance or a substantial change in circumstance with the person that has been receiving it. For example, if they get married, it would stop the spousal support, the maintenance. Another thing is if they became, self-sufficient and were able to maintain their necessary expenses, and you see that they had a windfall and they may no longer need the need for spousal support may not be there, and you can argue for that to be terminated.
What's the process for somebody who is paying spousal support and says, wait a minute, they just got all this money, or they've got a new, they moved in with their boyfriend who makes tons of money. Like, what is the process for somebody to contest that?
At that particular point, it's like child support. You file a modification and you ask for termination, and the other party also too could ask for increase of the spousal support. So it's just based on what circumstance and situation has caused the need for a modification.
So it goes both ways, is what you're saying.
Correct.
It can be increased or decreased depending on what's
Correct.
going on.
Correct.
What are some of the most common challenges that you see individuals face when they're trying to seek spousal support?
The biggest is understanding that there's a statutory limit on what you can receive. They're not going to give you 50% of the other person's income because you want it. They're only going to give about 20%.
Mhm.
And at that 20%, you have to make do. And what I find is that couples want is they want 50%. And I mean, not couples, but the individual want 50%. And you're divorcing. You're no longer entitled to 50%. That went by the wayside when you said, I want to be divorced and I no longer want to live with them. Also, too, just because what we find or what I find is when you have a stay-at-home mom that really dedicated her life and everything to the marriage and to the kids and raising the kids, they feel very slighted when the spouse files for divorce and they're like, I did nothing wrong. He's the one that cheated and he's the one that did X and he's the one that did what. Why shouldn't I receive, compensated for that particular time and compensated for the hurt and pain, etc. And so I should receive more money than 20%
Mhm.
is what.
Yeah, it just doesn't work that way.
No,
Yeah.
no, no, no.
Can you talk about the importance of having an attorney on your side? And I know obviously you're a little biased, but at the same time, these are complicated waters we're talking about here. This is not easy. So, can you kind of talk about how you help clients in these situations?
Knowledge is key. So knowing what the statute says, knowing, because I've seen individuals end up getting into some terrible agreements, not considering the statute, not some terrible agreements by not consulting a lawyer. I had one party just agree to pay several thousand of dollars just to hush money to get his wife to go away.
The
Yeah,
go away money. Yeah.
yeah, to go away. Just go away. I'll give you whatever. And
Mhm.
he end up suffering. And they need that help to say, wait a minute, I understand you want the wife to go away, but in the long run, this is gonna cost you more than if you just would follow the statute, pay what you need to pay, and move on. Because the other side is going to understand, or somebody's going to let them know that they're not entitled. They're just not entitled to have what they're asking.
Are there situations where someone could have to pay both spousal and child support?
Absolutely.
Does it get
Absolutely.
calculated differently?
It is. So spousal maintenance is 20% net income. Child support is based on the
How many
amount of
kids?
children,
Yeah.
etc. So both of them have that baseline 20%, but whereas child support could go up and with the amount of children that you have, spousal maintenance is going to be that flat 20.
But is there any considerations like, oh, well, because they have 3 kids, spousal might be less because of there's more money coming in, or it just doesn't work that way? It's still
No, it
that
does
straight calculation.
straight
That
calculation.
can get expensive.
Ching ching. Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing is that they will not go more than 50% of the person's income.
Okay.
And that's based on federal law. So they try to keep that. Maybe the spousal support will be lowered if it looks like the paying spouse is going to end up paying more than 50% of their income.
Yeah, you don't want the paying spouse to end up in a gutter. You know,
Correct.
because you're
Correct.
trying to get to do right by other people. Yeah. So
Correct. Correct. Those are
I've
the
heard of stay
things.
together for the kids. I'm hearing now stay together for the monies.
Exactly. Exactly. That they are the most important things in this in this situation is the kids, the kids, the kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you very much for tuning into ALP Corner Family Law in the Heart of Houston with Allecia L. Pottinger. To connect with Allecia and her team, head to alplawfirm.com and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Allecia, so great chatting with you again. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.